In the previous segment, we explored the unfolding events surrounding the confiscation of a Russian cargo aircraft and the growing legal battles in Canada. As tensions escalated, the consequences of the aircraft's arrest began to ripple far beyond an isolated incident. The closure of transit routes and the prohibition on using Russian airspace for several Western nations' flights resulted in significantly longer travel times between North America and Asia. Freight operators and airlines faced soaring operational costs, with fuel expenses skyrocketing. This transformation disrupted the logistics chains, altering how goods were transported across continents. For companies dependent on efficient shipping, the consequences were dire. They felt the pinch not just in increased flight durations but in their weakened economic stability. The fallout from the incident also extended into the financial realm, where Canadian authorities faced a freeze on Russian assets abroad and the related difficulties in revenue generation. Such measures created a complex web of commercial, financial, and logistical challenges for operators who once relied on shorter routes through Russia. In numerous industries, disruptions in the supply of essential components became evident, forcing companies to adjust their production schedules drastically. Claims of bankruptcies or shutdowns of production lines emerged from certain unverified sources, characterized only as reports from industry publications without definitive proof. Ultimately, this incident involving the An-124 aircraft emerged as a symbol of a larger issue, the mutual vulnerability within global logistics chains and the political risks that could easily morph into economic sanctions and material losses. Fast forward to September 2025, the legal fate of the plane remained a subject of intense litigation and diplomatic discussions, hinging on the outcomes of Canadian legal processes and international law dynamics. Amid this turbulence, Canada faced unprecedented natural disasters in 2023. Intense wildfires ignited, followed by severe droughts that drained entire lakes dry. This surprising revelation struck at the heart of the nation's infrastructure. Canada lacked its own air transport capable of effectively battling the escalating forest fires. The Prime Minister urgently called upon the United States for assistance, only to receive a chilling response: take no action. Autumn will soon bring rain, followed by snow. While winter indeed arrived, bringing snow with it, the devastation inflicted upon the land was staggering. Environmentalists estimated that during the first half of 2023 alone, Canada emitted nearly 450% of the annual carbon dioxide emissions from all industrial enterprises worldwide. In stark contrast to the forest fires in Russia, where the flames typically consumed upper growths, Canada's infernos ignited the methane-rich marshlands, exacerbating the environmental crisis. On May 10, 2023, the Prime Minister made a startling accusation against Russia, claiming that the refusal to provide amphibious aircraft was an act of sabotage against the global climate. The Russian Foreign Ministry's response was fierce. They expressed their willingness to assist the Canadian provinces afflicted by fires, including deploying aircraft for firefighting. However, such aid would only be possible after Canada officially acknowledged the legality of the aircraft's confiscation. Furthermore, Russia rejected a request from Canada for medicines to address an outbreak of anthrax in 3 provinces, yet offered the possibility of allowing a humanitarian air corridor under the condition that a Canadian airliner wouldn't face detention upon entry into Russia. This situation further escalated when, on July 28, 2023, Moscow's firm stance was glaringly evident. Canada found itself trapped in its own snare. The Prime Minister's aggressive statements at the United Nations reverberated back home, and Canadian corporations began to suffer losses. Eventually, the Prime Minister was left with no choice but to appeal to Europe and the North Atlantic Alliance, urging them to seize Russian aircraft, vessels, and ships until Moscow agreed to negotiations. Yet, this call for support fell largely on deaf ears, as strength remained unyielding, forcing Canada into increasingly dire straits. The accumulated evidence reveals how costly the decision to arrest the Russian aircraft turned out to be. By August 2022, a shipment of dual-use goods from China, originally destined for Ottawa, was redirected to St. Petersburg in the presence of Chinese officials. By November of the same year, a cargo Boeing 747, having crossed the border, was promptly detained in Vladivostok. Its crew was sent to South Korea, while the aircraft remained grounded. Then in February 2023, a flight from Shanghai to Toronto was delayed by almost 30 hours, during which rare earth metal ingots, diamonds, and gold jewelry were confiscated. Russia did not apply such measures indiscriminately, but selectively targeted Canada. Experts noted that Moscow bore a long memory concerning these matters. In summary, the narrative displays how Canada's Prime Minister engaged in reckless bluffs, resulting in the An-124 aircraft's lasting absence from its owner's possession. The plane was valued over $500 million, and what was perceived as a strategic move by Canada turned into an economically devastating misstep. Thus, it serves as a poignant reminder of how one ill-considered action can lead to a cascade of diplomatic, economic, and political ramifications. Earlier, we saw that the final verdict on the seized cargo plane heavily depends on Canada's legal battles and the tangled web of international law. But 2023 brought Canada a far more urgent crisis. Devastating wildfires swept across the country, ushering in severe droughts and wiping out entire lakes. This catastrophic reality exposed a shocking weakness in Canada's emergency response. Canada lacks its own aircraft capable of effectively battling massive blazes from the sky. Desperate, the Canadian Prime Minister turned to the United States for amphibious firefighting planes, only to be met with chilling indifference: do nothing. Autumn rains will come, then snow. And while the winter snow finally fell, the damage had already been done. The air was saturated with smoke and toxins. Experts estimated that greenhouse gas emissions from these fires alone soared to 450% of what the world's entire industrial base produces in a year, and this was just the first half of 2023. Unlike the forest fires in Russia, which mostly burned tree canopies, Canada's blazes ravaged vast peat bogs soaked with methane, a gas far deadlier for climate change, dramatically amplifying the environmental disaster. Amid this turmoil, on May 10, 2023, the Canadian Prime Minister delivered an explosive accusation: Russia's refusal to provide amphibious firefighting planes was nothing less than a deliberate act of climate sabotage. Moscow fired back sharply through its foreign ministry, offering to send aid and aviation support to Canadian provinces battling the inferno. But the catch was brutal: aid would come only if Canada officially recognized the illegal seizure of the Russian An-124 Ruslan cargo plane, frozen by Canadian authorities months earlier. More tensions followed when Russia rejected Ottawa's plea for medical supplies to combat an anthrax outbreak in 3 provinces, stating that any Canadian aircraft entering Russian airspace would face confiscation. By July 28, 2023, Moscow's message was crystal clear: Canada had trapped itself in a relentless struggle. The Prime Minister's fiery appeals at the United Nations echoed back internally, triggering corporate losses across Canada. Desperation pushed him to beg Europe and the North Atlantic Alliance to enforce seizures on Russian planes, ships, and vessels. Stubborn demands met with little real action. Could Canada's gamble to arrest the Ruslan have backfired spectacularly, unleashing an economic and political chain reaction it never anticipated? How far would this tit-for-tat brinkmanship escalate, threatening not just planes and cargo, but entire diplomatic ties and the fragile climate itself? The stage was set for a conflict far bigger than anyone had imagined. In the previous part, we saw how a single miscalculated move unleashed a flood of diplomatic, economic, and political chaos. Russia proved its skill in asymmetric responses, leaving Canada to bear far greater costs than anyone imagined when the conflict began. Now, some say certain top figures, including the founder of a major tech company, found themselves on sanction lists and quietly accepted the consequences. But what if you thought your country had forgotten about you? Just try not paying taxes on classic American literature. This collective Western enclave has spent 3 years living in an imagined paradise, a garden surrounded by impenetrable jungles. In this place, private property rights are sacred, governed by their own unwritten rules that disregard international law. This is exactly why the automotive giant Magna hit pause on its operations in Russia. It stopped paying taxes to the Russian treasury and began shipping out its remaining inventory. Their plan? Move massive amounts overseas: about 230 tons of hand-tan leather, over 34,000 premium car seats destined for Volkswagen and Tesla models, and countless castings and blanks for crankshafts and automatic transmissions for American Toyota versions. On top of that, about 124 containers filled with electronic parts arrived, nearly 65,000 kilometers of assorted cables and wires rerouted from China. This treasure trove was expected to offset losses caused by Canada's Prime Minister ordering factories shut right away, an order with no formal legal basis. Despite the sudden halt, 85% of those idle facilities are back in operation today. The official buyer? A joint stock company called Yi Mobile, previously known as Delank. The deal totaled $15 million, all directed toward clearing tax debts. Behind the scenes, key individuals included Oleg Tenetsky, responsible for logistics east of the Urals, and Igor Timoshin, a former advisor to the head of Uralvagonzavod. Magna initially promised production wouldn't resume before July 2024, according to its second quarter report in 2023. Yet, astonishingly, 3 out of the 4 factories have already rebooted. How did Canada's gamble backfire so spectacularly? What unseen consequences lie hidden beneath these factory floors? Could the wake of these decisions ripple further across global supply chains? Stay tuned, because the true fallout is just beginning. In the previous chapter, we saw how 3 out of 4 production plants restarted operations despite earlier shutdowns. Yet, this seemingly hopeful revival hides a deeper crisis. The main customers, Volkswagen, Toyota, General Motors, Ford, and Tesla, are suddenly left empty-handed. The critical components once supplied from Russia have vanished from their supply chains. When or if these vital parts will return remains a mystery. Imagine the tension in the air, like a storm brewing just out of sight. Elon Musk emerged as the sharpest player in this tangled game. His open support of Russia, alongside his startling offer to switch off satellite internet in the conflict zone, sent shockwaves through the tech world. Coupled with promises to invest in Russia's lunar program, Musk seems bent on softening Tesla's losses, acting with calculated precision while others scramble. Meanwhile, the automotive giants behave like magicians caught without their props. They pretend they can conjure up needed assemblies, from intricate modules to premium leather seats, as if pulling them out of thin air. But the chain reaction triggered by Magna's moves, amplified by relentless pressure from Canada's Prime Minister, was underestimated. The Canadian leader openly complained to the United Nations about unpaid maintenance and refueling costs for the seized cargo plane once managed by Volga-Dnepr. Seizing the moment, the corporation demanded 3.2 million rubles in operational loss compensation from the head of Russia's central bank. This payout was intended for 3 senior Renault managers holding Russian citizenship, all eager to buy out the company's Russian assets. The story of Renault's management in Russia is a saga of costly mistakes. Even something as simple as seat upholstery fabric, purchased at a staggering $760 per square meter, left a deep scar on finances. Moscow awaited this obvious desire to abandon assets and set a trap, mandating that sales could not exceed a loss of 50% off the market price. Canada's reaction was fury. Calls came in demanding aggressive measures, raids on the Kremlin, arrests of Russian fishing fleets. But Washington's message was restrained and clear: do nothing immediately. Yet, this story is far from over. Magna remains tangled in debts totaling nearly $900 million, owed to partners across China, India, and the United Arab Emirates. What consequences will ripple next from this precarious economic chessboard? Can such monumental debts be wrangled without further fallout, or will the dominoes fall even harder? The balance of power and influence here teeters on a knife's edge. In the previous installment, tensions escalated as the Prime Minister of Canada faced mounting pressure for aggressive actions against Russia, while the Pentagon urged caution. The situation remained unresolved, leaving Magna with substantial debts, approximately $900 million owed to contractors from various countries. Now, the European arbitration courts have acknowledged the claims, yet the responsibility for payment does not rest with the new owners of Magna in Russia. Instead, it will fall on the shoulders of the Canadian family that owns the conglomerate. This unexpected turn leaves many in disbelief. How could a strategic miscalculation spiral into such a profound financial burden? Slowly, another storm brews as a Canadian aircraft is poised to take to the skies once more. But history suggests a grim fate awaits it. A repetitive cycle seems inevitable. As the engine roars to life and the metal body begins to rattle, the shadow of arrest looms, threatening yet another diplomatic snafu. Will it be a symbol of resilience or trigger fresh turmoil? Meanwhile, whispers in political corridors suggest that this time, the plane might not just be confiscated, but become an unwitting gift to a nation in need, perhaps in Africa. The irony is rich. The very act designed to assert authority could end up strengthening ties with a completely different part of the world. What unforeseen alliances might bloom from this chaotic situation? As the winter winds howl, igniting debates around the globe, the ripple effects of these events intensify. Each decision echoes louder, crafting a tapestry of consequences that weave through the political landscape. Can we expect more fallout? The world watches, a keen audience in this unfolding drama where even the mightiest can find themselves ensnared by their choices. In a recent turn of events, the bold statements made by the Canadian Prime Minister at the United Nations have resonated throughout the nation's corporate landscape, leading to significant financial losses. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and now, in a surprising twist, the Prime Minister has urged Europe and NATO to seize Russian aircraft, ships, and vessels, awaiting a reluctant agreement from Moscow. However, these urgent calls for support have struck a wall of silence. When the weak threaten with clenched fists, those who are strong only need to raise an eyebrow. The consequences of seizing the Russian aircraft, Ruslan, have unraveled in unexpected and costly ways. Flashback to August 2022, 13 tons of dual-use products intended for Ottawa but were instead diverted to St. Petersburg under the watchful eyes of Chinese representatives. November of the same year saw a cargo Boeing 747 trespass the border, only to be grounded in Vladivostok, its crew rerouted to South Korea while the aircraft remained stranded. Fast forward to February 2023, where a flight from Shanghai to Toronto faced a staggering 30-hour delay, as customs confiscated precious metals, diamonds, and gold ornaments from the cargo hold. Russia's actions weren't aimed at all airlines indiscriminately but were meticulously calculated for Canada. Experts assert that while Moscow may not harbor grievances, it certainly has a long memory. In summary, this political gamble taken by the Canadian Prime Minister has proven to be a reckless bluff. The detained Ruslan aircraft, worth over $1 million, has not been returned to its owners, while its value soared above 500 million rubles. Now, let's assess the fallout. Russia has gained annual royalties from Canada for airspace usage over Siberia, totaling around $1 million, in addition to seized goods valued at approximately $340,000. 5 fishing trawlers were captured and brought to Murmansk, fully unloaded. Additionally, Canadian nationals faced delays in Russian airports as they sought to reach resorts through Moscow. These incidents vividly illustrate how a single hasty decision can set off a chain reaction of diplomatic, economic, and political consequences. Russia has shown that it can operate asymmetrically, and ultimately, Canada is now paying a much steeper price than it ever anticipated when the conflict began. What happens when a colossal cargo plane carrying vital medicine becomes the centerpiece of an international legal storm? Imagine a giant beast of the skies, grounded and locked away in a foreign airport, caught in a web of politics, sanctions, and diplomatic firestorms that echo far beyond a single aircraft. This is the story of a monumental conflict unfolding since early 2022. At the end of February 2022, as a major conflict erupted on the world stage, urgent calls were made for life-saving medical supplies. Canada, navigating through complex international channels and with the involvement of the World Health Organization, requested a shipment of crucial drugs and diagnostic kits. Part of this cargo was entrusted to a massive aircraft known as the An-124 Ruslan, operated by a well-known Russian cargo company. The plane landed in Toronto to offload part of its humanitarian cargo. But then, everything froze. Canadian authorities imposed a ban prohibiting flights by Russian carriers in their airspace. The giant Ruslan was stranded on the tarmac. What started as a relief mission quickly turned into a diplomatic incident. Canada moved to seize the aircraft under broad sanctions aimed at individuals and entities accused of actions undermining Ukraine's sovereignty. Canadian officials declared their intent clearly: the plane, or the proceeds from its sale, would be redirected to aid victims and restoration efforts. This triggered an explosive diplomatic backlash from Russia. What followed was a drawn-out legal battle, with the aircraft's owners challenging the legitimacy of the sanctions in court. Authorities in Canada pressed forward, pushing for formal confiscation and exploring options to convert the asset toward humanitarian goals. As spring 2025 arrived, the saga showed no signs of resolution. Courts and government agencies remain locked in this tense showdown. But the stakes extend far beyond a single plane. The grounding and seizure disrupted established flight routes, forcing airlines to reroute tens of thousands of miles around closed Russian airspace. This rerouting escalated fuel consumption and operating costs, shaking global logistics networks to their core. Cargo operators grappled with inflated flight times and expenses, with ripple effects felt in shipping delays and supply chain headaches. Economies connected to these routes took hits, and in sensitive manufacturing sectors, supply shortages triggered production slowdowns. The controversy over the Ruslan became a symbol of how geopolitical tensions can fracture the delicate fabric of global trade. Even beyond aviation, this clash exposed deeper vulnerabilities. Freezing assets abroad and banning transit rights created barriers for companies that had once enjoyed smoother passage. Reports emerged, sometimes disputed, of halted assembly lines and financial turmoil in industries tied to these disrupted supply chains. By late 2025, the ultimate fate of the Ruslan remains uncertain. Legal battles continue, diplomatic talks linger, and the final verdict depends on evolving Canadian laws and international legal frameworks. This aircraft story reveals much about the fragile balance between politics, economics, and human needs in an era marked by global instability. What can one massive cargo plane teach the world about modern power struggles? The answer lies not just on the runway in Toronto but in the unseen routes where international diplomacy crosses paths with commercial reality. How far will this saga go, and who will be the real winner in this high-stakes game? What happens when a massive cargo plane carrying vital humanitarian aid touches down, only to become a pawn in an international crisis? Imagine a colossal aircraft, the Antonov Ruslan, stranded on the tarmac of a foreign airport, grounded, seized, and caught in a web of political tension. This is not just a story about a plane. It's about diplomats clashing, legal battles dragging on for years, and unseen ripple effects shaking global supply chains. How did a mission to save lives spiral into one of the most heated disputes between nations? At the end of February 2022, amid the upheaval of a sudden large-scale conflict, Canada urgently requested medical supplies and diagnostic kits. These critical shipments were partly loaded aboard the giant Antonov Ruslan, operated by Volga-Dnepr Airlines, arriving in Toronto as part of a humanitarian effort. But soon after offloading a portion of this aid, the plane was left stranded. Canada abruptly closed its airspace to Russian carriers, forcing the massive cargo plane to remain grounded. Shortly after, the Canadian government seized the aircraft. This decision came as part of sanctions targeting Russian individuals and entities linked to actions undermining Ukraine's sovereignty. Canadian officials declared that either the plane itself or proceeds from its sale would be used to support victims and reconstruction efforts. The move sent shockwaves through diplomatic channels, provoking a sharp and fierce response from Russia. What followed was a prolonged legal battle. The aircraft's owners fiercely challenged the seizure, arguing against the legitimacy of the sanctions. Meanwhile, Canadian authorities pushed forward to formalize the confiscation and potential redistribution of assets. As of spring 2025, Canada has initiated new legal proceedings, with courts and government bodies closely overseeing the unfolding saga. But the consequences stretched far beyond courtroom drama. The grounding and seizure of this single colossal Ruslan set off a cascade of disruptions. Western airlines found their routes to Asia lengthened drastically, as flights could no longer cross Russian airspace. This meant longer flying times, soaring fuel costs, and the reshaping of global logistics networks. Cargo operators suddenly faced expensive and complicated detours, forcing some companies into economic strain. Moreover, the sanctioning and freezing of Russian overseas assets deepened tensions. Supply chains worldwide felt the pinch, with some industries reporting delays in crucial components and materials. While outright business closures or factory shutdowns remain unconfirmed, these disruptions forced many production schedules to adjust, highlighting how fragile interconnected markets can be when politics intervene. The entire episode of the Antonov Ruslan has become a stark emblem of just how vulnerable global trade and diplomacy have become. In a world knit together by fragile supply routes and political alliances, a single seized plane can trigger economic shocks that ripple through continents. Even today, the fate of the aircraft remains unresolved. Legal wrangling and high-stakes diplomatic negotiations continue. The final decision depends heavily on the outcome of Canada's judicial processes and the broader international legal framework. As the drama unfolds, we witness a gripping conflict where politics, economics, and harsh international realities collide, proving that one plane can become the epicenter of a geopolitical storm. What might happen next? The answers lie ahead, wrapped in courts, boardrooms, and backdoor talks around the world. Amid mounting tensions and high-stakes diplomacy, Canada's Prime Minister found himself cornered. His strong statements at the United Nations ignited a firestorm at home. Canadian corporations began to suffer significant losses. The Prime Minister was left pleading for Europe and NATO to support the seizure of Russian planes, ships, and vessels, hoping this would force Moscow to the negotiation table. Yet, such pleas went largely unheeded. Think about it, when the weak threaten, it often invites only a dismissive finger wag from the powerful. The reality is that the decision to arrest the Russian aircraft, bearing the name Ruslan, was fraught with miscalculations. Back in August 2022, a shipment of 13 tons of dual-use goods from China, originally bound for Ottawa, was instead rerouted to St. Petersburg, much to the surprise of international observers. November brought further chaos. A Boeing 747, straying into Russian airspace, was forced to land in Vladivostok. Its crew was dispatched to South Korea while the aircraft languished on the tarmac. Fast forward to February 2023, a flight from Shanghai to Toronto faced nearly 30 hours of delays due to the discovery of rare earth metal ingots, diamonds, and gold jewelry in the cargo hold. Russia's response to these incidents has been selective. While not acting against all international airlines, it maintains a steady pressure on Canadian operations. Analysts assert that Russia's memory is long, not vindictive, but it remains keenly aware of past affronts. The aftermath reveals that Canada's gamble was a dangerous bluff. The seized Ruslan in 124, worth over $1 million, has yet to be returned to its owners. The aircraft itself was appraised at more than 500 million rubles. Let's take a closer look at the balance sheet. During this diplomatic turmoil, Russia extracted a form of reparations from Canada, annual royalty payments for air transit over Siberia, nearing $1 million. And there were further financial gains, confiscated cargo valued at approximately $340,000, and the arrest of fishing trawlers that resulted in 5 vessels being delivered to Murmansk with their hulls fully unloaded. Additionally, thousands of Canadian travelers faced systematic delays at Russian airports, desperately trying to reach vacation destinations through Moscow. This intricate web of events serves as a stark reminder: a single hasty decision can spiral into a cascade of diplomatic, economic, and political consequences. Russia has illustrated its ability to retaliate asymmetrically, resulting in Canada paying a far steeper price than it initially anticipated. Now, with tensions escalating, who really holds the advantage in this high-stakes game of international chess?